trust, but I can tell you really want to cut right through this. Yeah, right through this. 'Cause no one knows just what to make of this ball of dust that we're living on. One thing I know is that everyone will get hurt. So before we're gone, let's do this. Let's do this before the heavens have crashed to the ground. Let's do this. Let's do this before we're silent. Let's make such a sound. Oh, let's do this.
Hey, filmmakers. Welcome to Tuesday's Talks with Chris. Yeah, change your name to a T because I want to have nothing.
Maximum alliteration.
I will continue to tell you through this hour as you join us that this is your half hour, not hour, and you will ask whatever questions you have for Chris. And while we wait for people to get started and start putting things in the comment box, I figured we could talk a little bit about what our team is currently going back and forth on Messenger, which is considering doing a project that's based on a real life inspirational story. Do we actually need to get rights to do someone's story?
Not the story per se, but if you're going to use their image and likeness, then you're going to need a license for that, or you're going to need to be able to show that your use of it is going to be fair use. If you're going to use any copyrighted clips of them, then you're going to need to show that that's fair use as well, like video or photo or things of that nature.
Well, let's say we're gonna just go, I'm gonna make a story about Chris Edgar's life.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna cast somebody to play you, and we're never gonna show the real you, but we're using your name and what we know to be your true story. Do we need to get your permission?
Generally, I don't have a right to protect the story of my life per se, but it would still be a good idea in that situation to get a release from me where I consent to your discussion of me in the film, because that way I won't be able to come back and say, oh, you misrepresented something about me and that harmed my reputation. In other words, make like a defamation claim. So it's best if I release you from all potential claims that I might have in connection with the film. But I can't say, hey, you're about to tell my life story, so the law gives me a right to stop you.
And I figured that to be true because I've seen plenty of unauthorized biographies.
Right, like the Elizabeth Holmes one that was done recently on Hulu. Yeah, presumably she didn't, authorize that one.
I can imagine, because it doesn't make her look good. So let's hope we find some great story that we all want to tell. Those of you who are just tuning in, this is your half hour. So if you have questions about your film, anything film related for Chris while we have him, this is your chance to ask them. It's always weird because we're on a delay. So we always have to kind of go do, wait and see if people come up. What else has been going on in our producing lives that I might have questions about? I guess one thing we could discuss is when you have these teams. So you have, we have a team of a few producers. We have a couple writers. We're all kind of doing a project together. It's not traditional. We're normally like a writer has written a script and then we option the script and then we moved into the next stage. So when you have teams like this, what is your recommendation to them to kind of keep everything above board?
Well, if you feel like you're at the stage where you're ready to form an LLC, that is one specifically relating to the film, then I would recommend doing that for the usual reasons that I drone on and on about to you all the time about protecting yourself from personal liability. So that anyone who wants to sue based on some issue that they have with the film or the preparation for the film, they have to sue the LLC and not you personally. If you don't feel like you're ready to get to that stage yet, then I would form what's called a collaboration agreement. And that would be an agreement that essentially states that all of the people involved in this agreement, in this collaboration that we're doing, they're all going to play some specific role when it eventually comes time to go into pre-production and production. And that way, people don't feel as if there's a possibility that they could do all this work, for financing the film and putting together pitch decks and trying to attach talent and so on, and then get kicked out of the project, and then lose the value of what they did. Also, it should clarify ideally that no one is the employer in this situation. So no one's going to come back and be like, hey, I did some of these film decks, so why don't I get wages or something like that? Why don't I get paid by the rest of the group? And clarify that you're not forming any kind of legal relationship like a partnership or a joint venture. Usually these kind of agreements terminate, and I just did a video on this, which is why I'm just reciting all this stuff from memory right now. Usually these agreements terminate when people actually form an LLC, because what the LLC is going to do is it's going to employ each of these people as producers or as writer-directors or what have you, the role that they're going to play in the film. So the collaboration agreement is really kind of a temporary measure until people are ready to form an LLC and draft an operating agreement and articles of organization and all that good stuff.
Right. Especially when, like right now, there's no way we're ready to draft an LLC for a film when we're still trying to figure out what that film is. But everybody's still putting in the work. So I like at least having some kind of agreement. For those of you on the Facebook groups who are chiming in, if you did not get permission to see your name, we can't see it. So I'm going to ask this question, but I'd love to know who asked it. Something we're asked often: do you need permission to film a march or public protest on a city street? If you're going to use it in a film, TV show, YouTube, do you need clearance?
Generally, people don't have a right to their images and likenesses when they appear in a public place or a right to privacy. And so usually, you don't have to worry about that. If you're filming in a setting where you require permission to get in, like you're entering some sort of corporate office where the general public isn't normally allowed, then it's best to get releases from people. Now, that being said, the most prudent thing to do is always to get a release to the extent that you can. I mean, obviously you can't go up to 1,000 different protesters and get a release. So yeah, in that situation, it's a good thing that the law doesn't require you to do so. But to the extent that you can, it's a good idea, because then you can add in provisions that protect yourself into that release, such as, if someone sues me and then the lawsuit gets dismissed, then they have to pay my attorney's fees, for instance.
Nice.
That's a great provision to have so that people can't, go after you and sue you just to get leverage in order to try to force you to give them money, even though they know that their claims have no merit.
That question was from Lucky in New York City. And Lucky, I actually filmed an entire music video during a women's march. And it actually looks like a very, it makes it look like we have all this money because we have all these background actors. But one thing we've done when we do anything non-scripted is we just have a clipboard of release forms. So if you do go up and talk to someone and get their, their whatever you're getting on camera, you can just have them quickly sign a very simple release so that you have it. It's not that hard.
If you're doing interviews with people, I would definitely recommend getting a release. I mean, if you're just filming, the protest or the march or something like that, then, well, as a practical matter, you can't really worry about it. But because it's taking place, in a public place, it's not something that you have to be very concerned about. But I would definitely, particularly because somebody could say, oh, something that I said in the interview is copyrighted, for instance, right? You want to make sure that, people can't bring claims like that. So you do want to have this interview release if you're actually talking to people.
So anybody who's just tuning in, get your questions in the comment box. I'm trying to think of what else is going on in our film lives that have been bringing up questions. I feel like there's always questions. It's just never ending.
Oh, yeah.
I had a 3-hour lunch yesterday with Jim Holt, producer, where we just talked about fundraising and how to make that happen. And it's just like, you cannot learn enough in this business. I've been in this business over 20 years and I'm still like clueless in some departments. I guess also while we are waiting to see if anybody has questions that pipe in, do you have any updates on Film Tracts?
Well, I have. I've gotten a lot of people who, based on our last talk, graciously offered to be alpha testers for Film Tracts.
Awesome.
And it's almost ready for them, and probably within the next few weeks, I'm going to be sending out links that they can use to test the app, and then they can start downloading contracts for themselves and so on, and getting the benefit of it. We just have a couple minor things to work out. I know I keep saying that, but these issues are always
never ends. Websites, regular websites, never end, and you're trying to do some massive, like this is a massive project you're taking on.
It ended up being more massive than I predicted it was going to be. That's certainly true.
Yeah, I can see that. So I guess one thing we get asked often, and it's kind of really one of your expertise, is music rights and clearances.
Yeah.
People want to know, especially when they're going to film festivals, they want to know, do they need to have clearance to do a film festival if they're using a known artist? Do they need to have clearance if they're obviously, you think people realize they have to have releases if they're going to go broadcast anywhere or theatrical. But what about things like film festivals or just going, to YouTube? What do you tell people for that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a known artist, then even if you are, using it, using a clip from their song or something like that in a film festival screening, you're still going to need a release. Now, as a practical matter, if it's a relatively small screening and nobody knows about it, it may be too expensive to get a release. And it also may be too expensive to go back and edit your film and take out the copyrighted piece of music that you used. So, you may want to take the risk. But from a legal perspective, even if the copyright holder can't show that you caused them to lose money as a result of screening a film containing their song at a film festival, it's still possible for them to get what are called statutory damages. And this is an important thing to know when you're making this kind of decision. In other words, they can still get a court to require you to pay some amount that's between, I think it is it's like $75 and $30,000, depending on what the court considers to be the severity of the copyright violation. And that's per copyrighted work that's used without authorization. So that's something that you should take into account when you're thinking about whether to screen a movie that uses somebody's copyrighted work, even in a relatively small setting. The U.S. does have laws that are pretty strict about this kind of issue.
Yeah, and I've heard stories of people who have used famous pieces in festivals and they have gotten in trouble. But even unknown bands, if it's a newer artist, you're a lesser known artist, I've had some luck just going to their label or to them directly through like Facebook and getting them to jump on board. So it's not easy. That's why it's great if you have a music supervisor who can handle all that. Lucky asks, what are the top reasons a distributor will reject your chain of title?
So the chain of title, just so that everybody is on the same page about this, it means essentially the documents that establish who owns the IP associated with the film, which usually means the copyright associated with the film. So you could say that the chain of title starts with the writer, that is the person who writes the script. They get a copyright registration certificate showing that they hold the copyright in the script. And then the next step in the chain of title is the writer assigning to the LLC, that is the production company, the right to make a film based on the script. Technically, the chain of title extends to basically everyone who works on the production. So an actor makes a creative contribution to a movie by appearing in it, for instance. And that's the reason why it's important to have the actor sign a release saying that they can't make any kind of copyright claims based on the fact that they made a creative contribution to the film. So yeah, it's a concept that actually can end up encompassing most or all of the agreements associated with your film. Now, when you're talking about a distributor rejecting the chain of title, that's what I understand that to mean is a distributor saying, you haven't given us all of the documents making up your chain of title. So if you were only to give them a copyright registration certificate and a contract with the writer saying, the production company has the right to make a film based on the script, they may say that's not going to be enough. You have to give us all of the agreements that you made with your cast and crew members, with their releases of any kind of copyright claim and their releases of any kind of claim based on your use of their image and likeness. We need all of that just to make sure that no one, whether it's an actor or a crew member or whoever, is going to come back and say, hey, you used my creative contribution without my permission, and that's a copyright violation. Or you used and you used my appearance, you used my image or likeness in your film without my permission, and I can go after you for that. So it's really a way of the distributor trying to protect themselves as much as possible from any kind of liability based on these claims that you used a copyrighted work or image or likeness without permission.
When we turned over all of our docs to our distributor for the last movie, I don't feel like they really looked that closely at things, to be honest. So it's more you're just covering your own butt for these things. That's why I always say if someone appears in or on your set, get a paper signed, or before your set, or touches your movie, or whatever it is, like just have everybody sign things.
And what you specifically want them to sign in the agreement, the important clauses are then image and likeness and release. So they release the right to use their image and likeness in this film for any and all purposes in any and all media in perpetuity, that usual language. And you also want a clause, and your distributor is going to ask for this too, saying that they can't get what's called injunctive relief, which means an order by a court saying that the film can't be released. And that would be a really sort of drastic remedy that a court is not likely to order. But it's still important if you want to, cover your bases as much as possible to make sure that no one can get that sort of thing. And of course, if someone were actually able to go into court and get that kind of order from a judge, then the distributor would lose the whole value of their investment, which is why it's so important to distributors that you have that kind of clause.
Very smart. Keep your questions coming. Put them in the comment box. What are some things? Let me think. What are some things that we have dealt with that were weird? Something come to mind where you're like, we would have never thought of that, and it was an issue for us or for someone else you've dealt with. There's got to be weird instances of anything.
Yeah, there's always weirdness in indie film, right? There's never any shortage of that.
There's always something. Let me think. What have we done in the past? I mean, it's funny because we're talking about chain of title, and I'm thinking back to my first film my first feature I ever did. It was like me and friends. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure even then, even though I probably found my stuff on Google, I had everybody sign something. Because here's the thing, like that film didn't get distributed. It took like 7 years or something before a distributor, like I had a relationship with the distributor who could distribute this first film. So I still had to provide that stuff. And that's before it was digital. So I have like this, like, these binders like this
That's
for
great.
these movies. But yeah, what else has been?
You even had a big binder for The Breakout, right? Well, hopefully it's not.
Yeah,
still
The Breakout is huge. I think The Breakout is the last movie that we did on everything on paper.
Yeah.
After that, I think we started going digital, which is so much better. And now you have, my file system is literally like past projects, and it's every single project and then every single thing that ever went on with that project. If it's a production Bible, if it's contracts, if timesheets, payroll, like everything for those projects, we could always go back and find. So I think it's important that people start thinking about that just it's digital now. You can keep everything.
Yeah.
That's actually a good question though, Chris, is how long do I have to keep stuff? So like, if I guess since Love or War is still being distributed and still online, then technically I need to still keep all that stuff. But let's say I have a movie that is no longer really anywhere, then is it safe to toss that? Or do you say, no, still keep it for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, these days, since you can keep all your records digitally, I don't really see any need to. I mean, unless it's too expensive to keep buying more hard drives, to store documents and stuff like that.
I mean, documents are so small, but I'm thinking like for those of us who have these binders that are taking up storage space and attracting spiders, like what? At what point can I be like, yes, I can finally toss this?
Yeah, I mean, if the distribution of it is complete, like usually these distributor contracts, they tend to last for 10 years or something like that. And if, the parties don't choose to renew those agreements, and you think that there's nothing more that you're really going to do with the film, I mean, yeah, that's a long time after the distribution starts. But at that point, I might feel safe, if I had a huge room full of binders and I wanted to get rid of some of them to start trashing some of them. But the safest thing to do is always to preserve your records. And now that it can be done digitally, I mean, it's not that much of a hassle.
Yeah, for sure. The digital stuff, fine. Yeah. I've even thought about scanning all these old things, but they're so fat that I'm like, I'm not going to take the time to do it. Lucky has a great follow-up question to releases. He says, if you get consent on camera recorded, do you still have to have a hard signature? And I'm assuming this means those quick on the fly interviews that say like a protest.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get that kind of consent. I mean, it's the reason why it's best to have consent in writing is because then there's not going to be any kind of ambiguity, you know, if you're at this noisy protest, and it's not difficult to completely make out what someone is saying to you when they're consenting to the interview. Then you don't want there to end up being a dispute later where they can claim that, oh no, that's not what I said. So that's why a hard signature is always best. But I mean, legally speaking, somebody can consent to being recorded orally.
I also lucky in those instances on those on the fly interviews and such. I love to get their name printed and make sure it's legible and their email so I can contact them later to even say, hey, this is out now. Or if you have any follow up, anything at all, you know how to reach them. So I don't know. If you're going to do that kind of thing, I would just carry these hard releases. But it's good to know that you can just say you can get it oral and be okay. Margaret has a question. Can you use radio news voice recordings in a narrative documentary film? What is the clearance needed for news-based content?
Well, most of that content is copyrighted unless the copyright has expired. And it's probably not expired if you're using something that's TV or radio news, because the copyright is going to last under the current Copyright Act 7 years from the end of the life of the author. So if we're talking about a work made for hire for NBC News or something like that, the life of the author is going to continue, you know, for the foreseeable future. And so the copyright's not going to expire. For that reason, so technically under the Copyright Act, you're required to get a license to use the news or radio footage. However, there is something called fair use. And that is a doctrine that often applies in documentaries, because what documentaries typically do with video or audio clips that are copyrighted is they use them in a way that's called transformative, meaning that they give the clip a purpose that it didn't originally have. So if let's say you're filming a true crime documentary and you're talking to a witness to a crime, and then in the background or in the picture, you're showing these copyrighted news clips regarding the incident, right? In that sense, you're giving those news clips a purpose they didn't initially have when the news crew filmed them, because they were just trying to broadcast the news and, you know, make money for their channel or whatever. But in this case, what you're doing with it is you're giving context to what the person who you're interviewing is saying. And that's why the use is transformative, which is a big factor that works in your favor in determining whether your use of the copyrighted work is fair use and therefore protected from liability under the Copyright Act. Hopefully I didn't say that too quickly and it wasn't too complex for people who haven't heard fair use to understand. But I have videos on my channel, by the way, which is, you know, my Film Tracts channel on YouTube, where I go into a lot of detail about these issues.
Yeah, I would recommend everybody, if you go over to Film Tracts and dig deeper into this stuff if you need. And always, of course, you can always reach out to Chris. Margaret has a follow-up question about the music. For music and voice, is the materials release enough, or are there other sync rights releases needed?
If you're using a particular music clip, then your release should include both the composition rights and the sync rights. So the composition has to do with the music and the lyrics of the song, and the sync license has to do with the way in which the sync and the mechanical licenses have to do with the way in which the song was recorded. So the artist's actual, you know, the way they actually put it down on tape or on the video or whatever it might be. And whatever sort of license you sign with an artist or a record company is going to contain releases of all of the composition and mechanical and sync rights. If they don't, then you need to be using a different license form.
I've always been very confused about the difference in all the music. So like, can you break that down too? So if I'm hiring and if I'm taking a track, I can take a track and lay it in the background as just like soundtrack. I can take a track and have someone say lip sync to it. I could take a track and rewrite or have someone re-record it. There's all these different ways that you can do music, and you have to get rights for each of those. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, so it's one thing to have somebody perform a song, like let's say that someone wants to perform a cover of Justin Bieber, "Love Yourself" or something like that, but they want to do their own version of it where they play guitar and so on. Then what you're going to need is the composition rights. Theoretically, that's what you're using. You're using the music and lyrics to the song, but you're not using Justin Bieber's original recording of it. Whereas if you wanted to use Justin Bieber's actual recording of the song, then you would need what's known as the mechanical rights. So yeah, there are different types of rights that an artist or the record company, if they've assigned them to the record company.
So here's where I get confused, because I always hear you need sync rights and or background rights. Those aren't the same things.
Well, sometimes the artists will split up those rights that I've been talking about into rights associated with the context where you can use the music. So sometimes the artist will assign people the right to use their music as background in a YouTube video or Instagram or TikTok or something like that. And they can do that. They can split up the rights that they hold under the Copyright Act in these various ways based on the media in which their music is being presented.
Okay, cool. We have 4 minutes. So if anybody has any questions they want to get in, put them in the comment box. Are you still looking for people to help you with the alpha testing for Film Tracts, or are you going to wait until your beta testing to get a next round of people?
We have a good number of people now, but I mean, still, what I'll do if you send me a message via my Film Tracts channel, you can find me at Film Tracts on Instagram or on TikTok, on YouTube, and so forth. If you want to send me a message, or also my email is cedgar@cedgarlaw.com. If you're interested in finding out more about Film Tracts, then I'll put you on my mailing list associated with that, and you'll get updates about when we're looking for testers to participate in trying out the app. And by the way, this is an app that allows you to essentially draft your own indie film related contracts, whether we're talking about performer agreements or agreements for sharing of profits or non-disclosure agreements or what have you. It's kind of like the legal Zoom for indie film.
I will play your little commercial. I think we still have it here on our way out. Just going to stand by and see if there's any last minute questions that pop in. I appreciate you doing these, Chris. I think, in the new year, maybe we can do them every so many months and keep getting people. It's such a great service you're giving, just a half hour of free legal advice.
Legal information is how I would put it.
Legal information. It's not. It's funny because you usually say, I'm not a lawyer. This is just my opinion. But you're like, I am a lawyer. But it's still just my opinion.
Yeah, well, if I were going to give legal advice, then I would need to understand the particular circumstances.
Right.
Talking to, which is why I don't refer to it as legal advice. It's more like general legal information that hopefully applies in your case.
That makes sense. Well, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate you tuning in, and we will not be back with another Ask Your Lawyer, I don't think, in this year, but we'll see. So you might want to head over to Film Tracts and keep up with Chris and DM him questions that he can maybe answer via his own videos. With that, let me show them what Film Tracts is on our way out.
If you're an indie filmmaker, one thing every experienced person you talk to will tell you to do is make sure you have a contract with everyone who works on your film. Even if it's your mom and she's letting you use her house as a film location, you still need a contract. But of course, there's a problem. When you're making an indie film, you barely got room in your budget to feed your cast and crew, so the idea of paying a couple $100 an hour for a lawyer to do your paperwork often seems like a pure fantasy. This is why I made the app we're talking about in this video, Film Tracts. The point of Film Tracts is to help you prepare your own indie film contracts without having to hire a lawyer. The way it works is pretty simple. First, you choose the type of contract you want. You can put together all types of indie film-related agreements using the site. Then you fill out a simple form that asks you some questions about the specifics of your project. Film Tracts will put together a contract by plugging your answers into a template that I've prepared, which is modeled on agreements that I've drafted for independent filmmakers in the past. So, if you're an independent filmmaker and you're looking to lower your legal costs, but still use high-quality contracts for your production and not random stuff you find on the internet, definitely check out Film Tracts.